Welcome to the Daugherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome to our final podcast episode of the year. I'm your host, Frances Hayes, and today we're marking a significant milestone, the conclusion of nearly a decade of Peter McCormick's leadership of the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute. So I'm sitting down with Peter, Executive Director of the Institute today, and also happens to be my boss, for a deep dive conversation reflecting on the incredible things he's accomplished throughout his career, exploring his tenure here at DWFI, and looking ahead to his future. So we'll explore the pivotal moments that shaped his career, from growing up on a farm in Scotland to his international work in North America, Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, and what convinced him to make the move to the U.S. and more specifically the Midwest to lead a global institute. We'll discuss DWFI's greatest strategic achievements, the lasting impact of its work both globally and right here in Nebraska, and his philosophy behind investing in students. Finally, we'll tackle the most urgent challenges facing water and food security in the next decade, and discuss the legacy he hopes to leave behind. It's a conversation that spans a distinguished career, institutional growth, and the future of global innovation for a water and food secure world. So thank you for joining me today, Peter. And let's start with your early days. I think anyone that knows you knows that you're Scottish. So you grew up on a farm in Scotland. How did that early exposure to agriculture and nature shape your decision to pursue agricultural and civil engineering and ultimately focus on water management?
Thank you, Francis. Thanks for organizing this. I'm pleased to be here, and it sounds all very final that we're reaching this point in the journey. I grew up in Scotland in a farm family in a pretty rural part of the Scotland. It's the Machars of Galloway in the very southwest. I grew up working on the farm, very much involved in agriculture, but also involved in what we now refer to as the ecosystem around the farm. There was a salmon river bordering the farm, a trout stream, or as we'd say, a burn in Scotland, on the other boundary of the farm. So fishing, but also just exploring and being in the water. I think at that time, neither of my parents had gone to college. In terms of guidance of what to do after that, it was either work on the farm or go seek my sort of interests elsewhere. I was relatively good at mathematics and physics, so sort of steered in the engineering direction, and ag engineering at the time seemed a good fit, so that took me into that. But I think maybe the other piece of this is, I think even precursor to my interests in, at least in the agriculture and engineering, was I always had a very strong interest in international reading books on different parts of the world, and a sort of interest in seeing those parts of the world. Great.
So you had an exciting career before you came here to join us at DWFI. It took you across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. You had a leadership role at the International Water Management Institute, which is a great partner of DWFI as well. Can you share one or two moments from your international fieldwork that kind of changed your approach to water policy or shaped that?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because I think I've learned from all of our encounters from the many places. We've lived in 7 countries and multiple states. I not really international in this term, but I think a very important part of the journey was doing my master's at Colorado State. So still in the Platte River, still in this part of the world. But it was after I'd worked overseas. I'd been in Indonesia for a few years, come back to the UK, then came to the US to do my master's. And that was just when I was ready to really understand more about how I could apply my interests and skills. And I think that was really very transformative in that respect. I think there's other places I've then worked, but I think one of the unique opportunities when we spent 4 years in Eritrea. This is in East Africa, Northeast Africa. This was 4 or 5 years after completing my PhD, but it was really looking at a country that was just independent and coming out of a civil war and had become independent, and reconstruction, looking at water management and agriculture and so forth. And it was really taking a lot of maybe my practical skills from my early life and my sort of academic understanding of things, but really applying them in a very sort of challenging situation where we had to look at infrastructure and roads and institutions and laws and all dimensions like that. And it was all of these things where you're trying to actually solve problems, but really solve problems to have impact on the ground that was very significant and important and very stressful at the time. But again, I look back on that as an important part of my journey.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting challenge of kind of building it from the start, of having a say in how it works. I think sometimes we wish we could do that, but it's just not feasible. So that sounds like it was a really interesting opportunity. Yeah,
we were very fortunate. It was a very young country. There was a 3 or 4 year window there where it was doing extraordinarily well, and then the politics sort of swung against it. That's the sort of nature of the world. But certainly for us, we have very powerful memories of that time.
Yeah. So in 2016, you moved from a senior international research role at IMI to leading this new ambitious global institute here in Nebraska. DWFI was just over 5 years old at that time. So what was it about the Institute's vision that convinced you it was the next right step for you to join us here in Nebraska?
Well, I was asked during my interviews here by one of the board members, actually the board chair of Water for Food at the time, what was drawing me to this opportunity. This is Jeff Rakes, that I think many of our listeners may know. But Jeff asked me what drew me to this role. And I said, well, my personal, professional, and even my sort of goal, if I look back on what I've been doing, is it's very much on the water and food environment as well. But it was Water for Food was definitely my sort of guiding interest through most of my career in one way or another, from those early days in Scotland through to before coming here. And when I first saw the vision and mission of the Institute, and this was in 2010 when it was first developed, I actually came to the first conference in 2009. I was invited to that's my first time in Nebraska. And I was very drawn to that. At that time, my wife and I were already committed to going back overseas, and so we decided that an opportunity in Nebraska wasn't what we were interested in. But in 2016, I was still very much felt the mission and vision. The Institute was already having an impact around the world, and I was very much drawn to the Institute. And importantly, when my wife also came here, she had spent time in Kansas near Nebraska and earlier in her career. And so we were both very comfortable with the situation here in Lincoln, and we've had a very good 10 years here.
We're so glad to hear that. I'm sure it was a bit of a switch from where you were before, but
yeah, Sri Lanka to Nebraska is not something many people do.
Yeah, great. So under your leadership, DWFI expanded its financial base and has collaborated on lots of major projects with all sorts of other organizations and the university and the state. What do you feel have had the most lasting impact, both globally and here in Nebraska?
Well, I think we've managed to move forward on many fronts, and I say we. I mean the team here has been fantastic to work with. But it's the we is really extends through the university with a lot of support from faculty and leaders in the university, but also within the state. Great partners with the natural resource districts and so forth. In Nebraska, I've been learning a lot, but I think impactful where we've really tried to move the needle, shall we say, is on the digital agriculture, the data acquisition, developing that capability around monitoring the water use in agriculture and then applying that to the management. We're not there yet in terms of there's still a lot, and that's true of all of this space in water and agriculture. It evolves in front of us, the challenge changes, but certainly where the data, acquiring the data, being able to apply that to whether it's the farmers making the decisions or ultimately to the irrigation systems making the decisions, and this is not just the team within Water for Food, but definitely within the university, but also within our partners in the private sector, the pivot companies and others, Lycor here in Lincoln. It certainly moved that needle forward. Again, attributing that to the Water for Food Institute, I think would be a little dishonest of me to do that, but I see that as moved forward. The other piece, and it's definitely unfinished business, is on the water quality side here in Nebraska. There's a lot of capabilities in the state, a lot of good people working on these challenges, from the producers through to the scientists in the Water Sciences Lab. I think that conversation has really moved forward in the state. I'm really pleased to see the state taking leadership in this as they did in the past around water quantity. And I think that's an area where there's still much more to be done. It will always be a challenge that the state should be paying attention to, but I do feel we've made progress there. Internationally, I think that's also, I'm surprised by the progress we've made on smallholder agriculture. It seems, even when I came for my interview here, I was like, well, is this really something the Institute can have a tangible role in, is smallholder agriculture in the developing world? I myself have worked in that in the places like Eritrea, Ethiopia, Jordan, and other countries. But here I wasn't sure how we would make that work and where we can actually have a constructive role in moving this forward and not just doing very sort of 30,000 foot research. How can we actually turn this into impact on the ground? I have been really pleasantly surprised there. I've been very surprised by how we've been able to engage there and bring a lot of different thinking, or not a lot, help people think differently about certain aspects of it, particularly the business models, the work that our policy team have done under the leadership of Nick Brozovic. I think that's been really surprising, very pleasantly surprising, and I'm thankful also again to our partners on the ground that can work with us on that and see the value in what we're doing. And I think there that's been a very positive development.
Yeah. I think I'm also surprised by our smallholder work because it seems, why would we work on smallholder farming when we're here in Nebraska, where we have big farms and stuff? But I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that brings me to my next question, which is kind of focused on the relationship between Nebraska and our global work. So Nebraska is a global leader in irrigated agriculture. We do a lot of irrigation, mostly center pivot. But how can the work done by farmers and researchers here in Nebraska apply to solving water challenges in places like Sub-Saharan Africa and South America? And then also conversely, what has Nebraska learned from its global partnerships that we bring back here?
Well, ultimately, and this sort of takes me back to each farm is unique, each farm family is unique, but in the end also farmers around the world face some of the same issues and challenges. And so producing food with less impact on the natural resources and viably in terms of the finances is a challenge. And many of them are operating under pretty high risk conditions. The consequences here is bankruptcy and real challenges for the farm families, for the smallholders, of course. I mean, the risks there are it's pretty tragic when it doesn't go well. So it's what I'm trying to get at there is that their environment is different, and the challenges, the nature of the challenges are different. But ultimately, it is focusing on the farmers and the farm families and how that will work in that particular environment. I think there's the other piece of this to that I try to keep in mind and keep forward is we can produce a lot here in Nebraska. We do a lot with less water each year, really. But ultimately, the markets or the places we're trying to work with, like in sub-Saharan Africa, the population, the rate of population growth, the rate of economic growth is we still have to produce food in those environments. We have to have the agriculture working better, and sub-Saharan Africa has really lagged behind the rest of the world. So really supporting that is sort of it's really critical to make sure that we actually not only produce more food, but actually create livelihoods for the people in those rural areas. Here we talk about the rural vibrancy, the helping the rural communities, and the same really applies in those environments. So very similar kind of challenges, very different ways that we have to focus on that. But it's earlier I talked about the business models, and really the business models, is it financially viable for the smallholder farmer? Can they produce a surplus so that they can not only feed their communities, but they can help feed the growing urban areas, because these countries are urbanizing as well as expanding in population, and the rate of their capacity to produce food is slower than needed. There's a win-win situation there for the farmers producing, say, soybeans here, and farmers in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa maybe don't have the resources to produce soybeans, but then there's a demand for livestock feed. Mm-hmm. So definitely some opportunities for farmers in the US and farmers in the developing world to work together, at least through what we're trying to do. So I think I'm probably wandering off your question there a little bit, but it really comes down to the knowledge that what's really important, what the farmers in the larger systems here can bring together is they understand the complexity and the environment that they're trying to make these complex decisions in. They may not understand the specific challenges those smallholder farmers are seeing, but they also understand that they have to factor in the rainfall, the water management, the fertilizer, and all of these different components. That they've somehow, probably their biggest limitation is the time and energy they have to actually do some of those jobs. So it's something that aligning those interests and understanding that, and understanding it isn't just a simple case of sending feed or food to Africa. It's actually how do we make the systems work on both sides of this equation.
Yeah, what you said reminds me of a field visit we did with one of our global conferences where we brought some of the attendees to meet with a Nebraskan farmer, and it was really interesting to see the camaraderie between Nebraska farmers and farmers in other countries that were brought together, and the commonalities of what they would talk about, even though the crops were so different and where they lived is so different and the mechanisms are so different. But kind of that commonality, like there was a bond there of they all had a lot of risk, and here's the stuff that we're dealing with, and we're trying to solve these problems. And so I think that was really interesting to see firsthand, and speaks to what you just talked about, that, you know, there is some consistency between farmers and what they're dealing with no matter where they live, but we also just account for those nuances of local issues and structures and things like that. So I think that's very true. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about our student support program of the Institute. So we have supported nearly 150 students with millions in research funding since this program was developed in 2024. Now that was a little bit before you came to the Institute, but you have been a strong supporter of continuing that student support and the importance of training the next generation of students. Why do you think that's so important to your leadership philosophy, and what do you hope for this next generation of leaders that are coming through the university or starting their professional careers?
Well, they have the challenge. I mean, it's the next generation. That in the end, we're talking about the producers, but it's also the water managers, the decision makers, all the scientists, the research, because the importance of research to how Nebraska's been able to achieve its progress in these spaces can't be overstated. It's growing that curiosity and that capability and the capacity within these different levels or different elements of the water and food challenge is super important. And even people beyond that, maybe not the ones that are actively working in that, but also may end up on some of the decision-making boards and so forth, to really understand this complex issue and being able to develop solutions and apply those solutions. In the end, that's all really been a sort of principle. I look back, and perhaps this is something I haven't been as intentional as I should have been throughout my career, but certainly the interns, the students, the young professionals, even middle career professionals, is helping people engage in these issues and challenges, and helping them find the solutions and the capacity to do that, because ultimately it's the people that are going to manage this, whether it's the land itself or the water resources or the markets to actually make this all work. It's really creating that capability and understanding in that environment to address the issues we are faced with now, but also address the issues and opportunities that will emerge in the future.
Looking forward to the future, what do you think is the single most urgent challenge facing global water and food security that you think the Institute is positioned to address in the next decade, when these students that we're training are getting into their careers and having to solve these problems?
I think the challenge is a huge misunderstanding of water and agriculture, and I think we try to move the needle on that in terms of, because the sort of newspaper, the press stories tend to very much focus on the negative in water and maybe to some extent in agriculture. But ultimately, you have to look at the successes and what has happened over the decades, the 50 years or so since the Green Revolution began, 60 years, and then the progress that's been made here, like in Nebraska, trying to explain this in a way, even trying to explain the Ogallala Aquifer and why there's elements of the Ogallala Aquifer are in crisis and do need to be addressed. And those communities are addressing that. They're finding their way to do that. But here in Nebraska, because of the recharge from the sandhills, because of the natural resource districts, the institutions, and the political will here in the state, and the producers, we have a relatively stable system with quite an abundant water resources. So it's really making sure that people understand that. And it's very difficult to do because it doesn't make good headlines. That yes, there may be actually success, but I think this is the issue we face. And sometimes we get into water professionals specifically like to wallow in the complexity of it all, but it's trying to explain this in a straightforward way, that we need to be looking at where the constructive opportunities are. I was a little pensive. I think it also then comes down to the political will to address that, and I think that's why the politics of this it's local. And how do we address this? How do we make sure it works at a local level, and get decision makers to understand that this is a long-term investment they need to make in terms of their time. It also requires resources, and shifting those conversations. We've been intentionally trying to do that, not to prescribe solutions, but rather to get people to think about how do you identify solutions that work for your community.
Yeah, and I think you've done an excellent job at that, both here in Nebraska and globally, of making sure that we always have water and ag food as part of the conversation, because I think sometimes they get siloed, but they're so interconnected. I don't think you can talk about one without talking about the other. So,
well, there's definitely certain parts of the world where they now equate Nebraska with water and agriculture. Maybe not to enough parts of the world, but certainly they understand that and we're not prescribing a solution, but we are telling them what the principles are, working with them to identify the principles that they need to adopt to make things work. As we were talking earlier about the producers and the farmers, the other piece of this is the water managers. And the natural resource district system here in Nebraska is unique, and it's very positive, and it has its challenges. But the principles of how this was a devolved governance system that actually then has a way of developing its own regulations and support system for the local communities. I think that's really important to convey that, because many parts of the world we tend to talk about large interbasin water management programs, but ultimately institutions have to work at the community levels if you're going to get them to work at all, because the government can't be everywhere and shouldn't be everywhere, but rather it should be the communities that manage the water resources.
Yeah, and the trust that you get when you do it that way.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder there, Francis. Yeah. Trust is super important, and most communities will trust their own community members rather than someone from the outside. So building that trust is hugely important and significant.
Yeah, absolutely. So you will retire from the University of Nebraska at the end of this year, which is coming up very quickly. What are you most looking forward to in your next chapter, and what do you hope to do that maybe you couldn't do when you were in this role, if you didn't have time, or you couldn't? What are you most excited about?
Well, as you know, I've been using the retire word. I've been struggling a little bit with.
I don't think you'll ever officially retire, but retire from the university. It's not
finalized yet, but I am hoping to be an emeritus member of the faculty here at the university. So I will stay engaged, and certainly there's one or two things I want to continue on my own. I think the main in the short term, I just really want some time to clear my head a bit and reflect a little bit on where things have come from and where I'm going, and where I want to prioritize my energy. I think a full-time job where you're always waking up in the morning and your head's full of a lot of challenges in the day is also means you get less opportunity for creative thought in these sort of spaces. So I'm looking forward to that dimension of it. I think we my wife and I plan to spend a bit of time where she grew up in Southern California in early next year. I would like to go back and spend some time with my family in Scotland, and that's what we've got sort of planned for the beginning of the first half of next year. After that, I haven't my social secretary, my wife hasn't really told me what we're doing next. But I have no intention of backing away from the topic. That has been my sort of passion over the last 4 decades. But I will pick and choose more of the activities that I will engage with. And certainly, depending on the new leadership here, I will stay very much engaged with my colleagues here at the Institute and the university.
Well, it sounds like Miriam has an adventure planned for you, whatever that might be. But we hope that you will come back to Nebraska and join us and connect. And
will do.
I have no doubt that you'll stay engaged. So kind of my last question is just after this, your distinguished career globally. What legacy do you hope your work at DWFI or your other organizations in which you worked, what legacy do you hope to leave? What are you most proud of? And I know that's a very tough question for someone that doesn't really like to talk about himself.
Yeah, I in terms of a legacy, one of the opportunities that this role has allowed me is to go back and visit a lot of the places that I've worked in and Miriam and I have been engaged in, where we've had different successes and struggles perhaps in different communities. And I've seen places where we actually, you can see tangible progress, like we spent 2 years in Western Timor in Indonesia early after my PhD in the poorest part of Indonesia, and went back there in 2019 in the structures, and we built structures and tried to develop. It's very difficult to determine if you've helped institutions or not, but a lot of the people, of course, had moved on and so forth. It was heartening to see that the facilities were working, they were maintained, and that people were still doing there. But then there's another series of challenges that emerged also there around population had tripled and so forth. So it's hard to see that. You also, what you see when you go back into these environments, once you leave, the history gets rewritten. So so I don't see, in terms of what I'm proud of in terms of impact or my influence, my legacy. I think that it's the people, but then it's those people that move on and go to do other things. It's whether it's the producers or it's the students or my colleagues here. I have colleagues that are involved in many different things around the world. The ones that, you know, we had you were on this trip to Indonesia last year for the World Water Forum, and the minister there and I used to share a desk in graduate school in Colorado. And to see him having this, and my influence on him was just as a colleague, as a student, but to see him do so well and be in a very prominent position, I was just very happy for him. And it's that sort of legacy where you actually get people recognizing that you've had an influence on what they've done. I think I probably look back and I should have been a lot more intentional about that, but and then ultimately, I have to go back. Always going through my mind is when I start getting a little bit out of line in terms of my own ego. I always, in the back of my head, is what would my father think as a farmer and perhaps a more pragmatic individual. And I'm not really that.
Well, I think if you asked, anyone you've worked with here or in the past about your legacy, they'd probably all have very different answers, because I feel like you've had a hand in so many different things throughout your career and so many different experiences with different people. So I think there's not a lack of legacy that you will be leaving. It's just probably very different for different people. So
the history's in good hands, Frances.
I think so, yes. That's all the questions I have, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to add anything else that you want to comment on that we didn't cover. Any parting thoughts?
I want to thank everybody. It's been, again, I can't stress it enough. This is all about partnerships and colleagues, and I've been so struck by the support that we've had for the Institute, for the mission. I think that's one of the strengths of the Institute as we sit, and that was definitely one of the attractions of coming here. I've worked in water supply and other dimensions of water and environment and so forth, but one of the attractions of coming here was Nebraska gets agriculture, obviously, but it also gets water, and so a lot of Nebraskans understand what we do. You can have conversations with folks around these sort of issues, and people understand it. And those partners who have also taught me a lot about what is happening here and what's going on in the different natural resource districts in different parts of the state. So I think that the parting thought is very much this is on the progress that's been made is because of those partnerships, and that extends to some of our international partners, because even during COVID, we were able to run projects in places like Rwanda because we had really good colleagues and partners on the ground, relatively young partners who did very well, and even starting programs remotely. It's really heartening to see that, and I think I anticipate this is all going to go forward, and I think there's hopefully because of us there's more people now that are engaging in this space and trying to be constructive in the space, and so I think that's my parting thought. Is it's the problem isn't going to, the issues are not going away, the opportunities are also there, and it's how do we address them and how do we keep doing so. I'm as I said, I will continue to do my piece on this, but I just won't be trying to also quite manage to have the same impact that we're having through the Institute. I'll help others try to have that impact.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. So thank you so much for the conversation today and for your leadership of the Institute. I know we've worked together for about 7 years now, so I appreciate our conversations, both work-related and just life-related, and it's been fun to see your impact on the Institute. That is definitely a lasting impact, I feel. So, and just the guidance that you've provided for our staff and the different projects and the insight that you have from your past career of insights that maybe we don't think about, or impacts or things like that. So it's been really great to see the foundation that you've built here. I think the Institute was great before you came, and it's even greater now. So I think we all can see the impact you've had, and we hope to continue that without you at the helm. But you'll absolutely be missed, and thank you just for the privilege of working alongside of you. And I'm super glad that our paths crossed, and you have some big shoes to fill. So thank you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. The Institute's in good hands.
Right, and that concludes this episode of the Water for Food podcast. We'll include a link in the show notes to a piece that we did on Peter's impact as part of our most recent annual report, so you can check that out. And join us next time for another insightful conversation on critical issues in water and food security.
Thanks for joining us this time on the Daugherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.